All right, this is the VR template quick start guide. Here we're looking at the pawn blueprint. And again, I'm just going to give you a quick once over the world so that you should be able to figure out what to do. I won't be able to go into too much detail on everything because there is quite a lot of stuff. And frankly, a lot of it is not that impressive and you can just figure it out on your own. Okay, so on the main event graph, let's go ahead and start with start. One of the first things it does, this is some deprecated stuff we don't need to worry about. I left it in case I want to use it again later. Um, Initializing variables, figuring out what kind of HMD you have, and then setting variables based on those. Okay, no big deal. You might want to go in and do more work on that depending on whether or not it jives with the hardware that you're using. Spawning and binding the hands, again, no big deal. The hands are their own separate blueprints. They're their own actors, and we'll cover them in another video. All right, moving on to all the stuff that happens on tick. This, don't worry about it. There's some debug stuff in here. I have some things preset for if you want to get some things up on your HUD and see what's going on in the game. We'll come back to this in a minute. What I want to get to is room scale input. Okay, so these are convoluted. What you can do in the engine is actually just bind the camera to the HMD. I haven't done that here because it gives us more flexibility at the cost of a little bit more complexity up front. Okay, so this just figures out where your camera should be located. It figures out based on where your HMD is and where it was, where it should be now. Hands, same thing with the hands. Rather than just binding your hand actors to motion controller components, I've got these invisible motion controller components in your pawn that then update your hand actors. This is going to be useful for things later on, even if it's not immediately clear why that is so complicated. But then the nice thing is that the hands and the camera, they just sort of work, so you shouldn't really need to mess with them too much. Getting input axes, this is just taking from your controls, what is your trigger doing, what is your grip doing, and then there's some changes depending on what kind of controller you're using. So for example, the Vive controllers, I believe they only have a binary grip. They're not really an axis. They're either on or off. So you can set this variable here to use it that way. And then also somewhere else, so there's another problem with the index controllers where they are too sensitive actually to grip. So they have sort of the opposite problem of the Vive controllers. And so I've set them so that they only activate if they go above a certain threshold, so that if you just tap your index controllers, they won't do anything. Now, if you want to turn that off, for example, because you have Oculus Touch controllers and you like the way that they are, you can just set this grip threshold to 0. And this just talks to the hands, lets it know what's going on. All right, moving right along. Movement. So we did room scale movement and hand movement. Now this is 360 locomotion. This is up at the top, but it's really the last thing we ought to cover. But I'll do this first. This is just a bug fix so that if you can't wall sit, don't worry about that too much. We'll go down through here. So update cap rotation. This is not strictly necessary in my demo because you don't actually have a visible body. But if you were to have a body, this is the part that would rotate your body so that it was in line with your head. And you could do things like give it a delay or make it only rotate after a certain offset is reached, whatever. Capsule height, this takes your real life position, and then it figures out how tall your character then, or whether or not your character is crouching, and it updates your body capsule to be a little bit smaller. Okay, these three things do traces. The first trace checks the floor slope, basically, and it handles stairs. You can go through this to see how the math works, but the bottom line is that it sends out a vertical offset. It sets this variable that we're going to use later. So this is for your stairs and for your slopes going up and down, how much the thing needs to do that. This one is just going to check for obstacles. Here's a deprecated version that you may or may not want to use later, but it's, as you can see, it's coming down here. And yeah, let's just make sure you're not bumping into anything. So this would be more like at waist height rather than a stair or something like that. And you can set what counts as a stair that you want to step up and what counts as an obstacle that you want to bump into by setting the max step height variable. And the next one is just check falling. Are we actually standing on solid ground or should we fall? And the reason I separated these three out is that they really want to have different. They need to be shooting at different places in order to really avoid a bunch of bugs, because sometimes these will trigger each other in ways that are not helpful. And then we may want to set falling. So if you are falling, we turn gravity on, and if you're not falling, then we turn gravity off and zero out your physics velocity. Okay, now that we know a bit about your environment, we take more inputs from your controller. So we got these earlier. We set these variables earlier, and now we're checking them. We're saying, okay, if we can move, what should we do? And this one strictly calculates the direction, and you can either have it be from your from your hand, or from if you flip this variable, it'll be the reference direction will be your camera. I currently have it set on hand. Okay. Next one is speed. Speed is just it's a combination of these various multipliers that you can mess with, and also what's going on with the floor. So I have it so that if you're going up a slope, it'll slow you down, and then you can decide how much it slows you down by, etc. And so this final move vector here decides based on what your speed is, based on your inputs and based on your environment, how much you should be moving in the next frame. And then here, whoops, we got, there's a lot of this where I changed my mind and then still kept the old one in there just in case. You move the body capsule first based on that that vector. So we have the vertical one that helps you get up over terrain or up over stairs. This one is based on your movement input, and your vertical is strictly like discrete movement. It tells you, hey, this is where your guy is. Whereas your other movement is physics-based, so we're actually just adding impulse. And the reason that I did it this way is so that you could more easily jive with other things that you want to be physics-based, like if you're jumping off of something, or if you're throwing yourself off of an anchor. This just keeps it all the same. And additionally, it makes it so that you can't change direction on the fly. This is kind of important in shooters where you can't get people zigzagging and serpentining unrealistically, quickly changing their directions, where if you want to change your direction, you first got to slow down and then move in the other way. But whatever, you can change it to be more like this one. And this determines if your capsule's hit, like you've hit an obstacle, then it might bounce you back, or it might not. So what this has to do with is the leaning. High obstacles such as tables can be leaned over. So it's going to decide based on your inputs whether or not to bounce you back away from that obstacle, or to let your head just kind of float away from your body, which is going to be stuck on the outside of the obstacle. And if you use your thumbstick to try to move, then it's going to bounce you immediately. Or if you go a certain distance past your body, your head is going to snap back to your body. Okay, that is the basics of how the 360 locomotion works, and I want to point out that this was years ago. I watched a tutorial by Jonas Molgaard and basically copied it blueprint for blueprint. I've since modified it substantially, but this does have a direct line to some of his videos, so I want to point that out, that he's awesome. This is definitely directly based on that, albeit with some changes. All right, moving into some other things that you can do. Snap rotation. This is just with your right thumbstick. You can move it. Your body will rotate. This is one of the reasons that we made this convoluted, is that when you rotate your body, that can actually get complicated because your body consists of your capsule, your actor, your head, and all this other stuff going around. So by breaking out the different parts and making this more complicated, it makes it much easier to rotate you. So no big deal there. Teleportation. This I just stole from the basic template. You just shoot out a projectile path trace, and then it comes back, and you set the target. And then once you release the scan button, it takes you to that target. Moving by anchors. So anchors are what I call items that stay put and you can move yourself off of, like a pull-up bar or a ladder or something. And with ladders, you can reach up and pull yourself up, or sometimes you could even push off of them and you'll go flying or whatever. And this does that. So this is the movement. This is the vaulting, the pushing off and go flying. Not terribly complicated. This is where you get the message to start doing the anchor thing. So your item that is an anchor will send the message to your hands, and then the hands will send it to your pawn and let you know, hey, this thing is an anchor, this is where the anchor is. And then it'll start doing math to figure out, based on how you move your hands, this is where your body should move. Okay, I'm going to now move over to the input graph. I'll move back. We got some axes over here from your controllers, but the input graph is where most of your inputs and like your controls live. So left side, right side, and then as I mentioned, those axis values are gotten separately, and I put this little link here in case you come here and you that was actually what you're looking for. Okay, so a lot of these are binary. They just happen on click. The exception is the grip threshold, as I mentioned. If you don't want a grip threshold, then either set to binary grip or set the grip threshold to 0, or both, whatever. You'll notice here that this says, it's not actually doing a thing, it's sending a message instead of directly doing an action. And we'll talk about that next time in the hand blueprint video. The last thing is up here, sit down. Much like vaulting or anchoring, sitting down requires an item to send you a message, lets you know where it is and that you're trying to sit, and then this just, sits your butt down in there, and then it fixes your yaw so that you're facing forward in that seat. That is the basics of the pawn. Hopefully you won't have to mess with it too much. I imagine that mostly it will be changing some of these variables. So movement defaults, these are most of the variables that you'd like to mess with, or just removing capabilities. For example, okay, my game doesn't have teleportation, delete that, or changing it from physics-based movement to direct movement, or whatever. But my intent here is that you should take this mostly as is and then do some modifications rather than using it as a jumping off point for other things, like the item blueprints will be. That'll make more sense in a future video. Okay, next video coming up is the hands blueprints.